Your cruelty is beyond redemption. You've destroyed your father's life. This court has no mercy left for you. I sentence you to 300 years in prison. Go to hell.
She stood barely 5 feet tall, wrists trembling against the weight of the handcuffs. In the courtroom, the words came like a verdict from another world. "You'll die in prison," the judge said, his voice echoing across the silent gallery. The girl was 16 years old. She had killed her father, a man whose house, by all appearances, had been the picture of suburban order. But behind those walls, investigators would uncover a story of fear, silence, and years of escalating violence that no one had dared to speak about. How does a child come to murder the person meant to protect them? Was it rage, survival, or something far more complicated? This is the story of a family imploding from within, and the courtroom sentence that would force a nation to ask, what does justice mean when the accused is still a child? The call came in at 9:47 p.m. on a Thursday in late November. The dispatcher's screen flickered with an address in Willow Creek Estates, a subdivision where lawns stayed trimmed and porch lights burned until midnight. The voice on the line belonged to a girl. Young, shaking. "I had to," she said. "He was going to kill me." The line went silent except for breathing. "Is someone hurt?" the dispatcher asked. "My father. He's not moving." 2 patrol units arrived within 6 minutes. The street was quiet. Motion sensor lights illuminated driveways lined with mid-sized sedans and basketball hoops. Officers approached the 2-story colonial with hands near their holsters, unsure what they would find. The front door stood open. Inside, the air felt thick. The living room lights were on. A television played without sound. On the floor, near the coffee table, lay the body of Marcus Thornton, 43 years old, face down in a spreading pool of blood. A single gunshot wound to the chest. The weapon, a 9mm handgun registered in his name, rested on the carpet 3 feet from his right hand. Sitting on the stairs, knees pulled to her chest, was his daughter. Her name was Aria Thornton. She wore a gray hoodie and jeans. Her eyes were red but dry. When the officers entered, she didn't move. She didn't scream. She simply looked up and said, "I did it." The paramedics confirmed what the officers already knew. Marcus Thornton was dead. Time of death estimated between 9:30 and 9:45 p.m. The wound was fatal within minutes. There were no signs of forced entry, no signs of a struggle beyond the body itself. Aria was read her rights. She nodded at each line. She asked for water. She did not ask for a lawyer. At the station, Detective Laura Simmons sat across from her in a pale green interview room. Aria's hands rested flat on the table. Her voice, when she spoke, was steady in a way that unsettled the detective. "He told me I was worthless," Aria said. "He told me I'd never leave that house, that I belonged to him." Detective Simmons leaned forward. "Did he threaten you tonight?" "He always threatened me. Tonight specifically." Aria looked down. "He said if I tried to leave again, he'd make sure no one ever found me." The detective noted the phrasing. "Tried to leave again. Where were you planning to go?" "Anywhere." By midnight, the crime scene unit had documented every angle of the living room. Photographs showed the placement of the body, the gun, the sofa cushions undisturbed. There were no overturned chairs, no shattered glass. The scene looked almost staged in its stillness. But upstairs, in Aria's bedroom, investigators found something else. A journal tucked beneath the mattress. Pages filled with tight, slanted handwriting. Entries dated back 3 years. Words like "afraid" and "please stop" and "I don't know how much longer" appeared again and again. On the kitchen counter, a stack of mail sat unopened. Among the envelopes was a letter from the school counselor dated 2 weeks prior, requesting a meeting about Aria's attendance and visible injuries. The neighbors, when questioned, spoke carefully. "They seemed like a normal family," said Mrs. Brennan from next door. "Marcus was a deacon at the church. Always polite. I'd see him mowing the lawn on Saturdays." "Did you ever hear anything unusual?" She hesitated. "Sometimes there was shouting. But families argue." "Did you ever see Aria with injuries?" "Once or twice, maybe. A bruise on her arm. She said she'd fallen during gym class." Another neighbor, an elderly man who walked his dog past the Thornton house every evening, mentioned seeing Aria sitting on the front steps late at night. "She looked like she was waiting for something," he said. "Or maybe just thinking. I always waved. She never waved back." The picture that emerged was fractured. A respected man in the community. A quiet daughter who kept to herself. A house that, from the outside, suggested order and routine. But inside, something had been breaking for a long time. By dusk, detectives understood only one thing. Whatever had happened inside that house, it wasn't random, and it wasn't new. Detective Simmons returned to the Thornton house the following morning. The crime scene tape fluttered in the wind. The blood on the carpet had dried to a dark stain. She moved through the room slowly, cataloging details the initial sweep might have missed. In the basement, she found a weight bench and a wall-mounted gun safe. The safe stood open. Inside were 3 firearms, all legally registered to Marcus Thornton. The 9mm used in the shooting had been the only one loaded. Upstairs, in the master bedroom, the bed was made with military precision. The closet held rows of pressed shirts and polished shoes. On the dresser sat a framed photograph of Marcus in his church robes, hands folded, expression serene. Aria's room was different. The walls were bare except for a single poster of a mountain range. The desk held textbooks stacked in careful order. The window overlooked the backyard, where a rusted swing set sat unused. The journal they'd found wasn't the only one. In a box beneath the bed, there were 4 more, each filled with years of entries. Detective Simmons sat on the floor and read. October 12th, he locked the door again. Said I had to learn respect. I didn't eat for 2 days. December 3rd, told Mrs. Rivera at school I was fine. She didn't believe me, but she didn't ask again. March 8th, heard him tell someone on the phone I was difficult, that I needed discipline. I don't know what I did wrong. July 22nd, he hit me today? Not with his hand. With the belt. I can't sit down. September 15th, I thought about running away. But where would I go? Who would believe me? The entries painted a portrait of escalation. Small cruelties building into something larger. Isolation. Control. Fear that calcified into numbness. Forensic analysis confirmed the timeline. The gunshot occurred between 9:35 and 9:45 p.m. Aria's fingerprints were on the weapon. Gunshot residue was found on her hands. The bullet trajectory indicated the shooter had been standing, the victim either seated or rising from the sofa. There were no defensive wounds on Marcus Thornton's body. No signs he'd raised his hands or attempted to block the shot. Either he hadn't seen it coming, or he hadn't believed it would happen. Interviews with Aria's teachers revealed a pattern. She was a good student, said Mr. Kowalski, her history teacher. Quiet. Never caused trouble. But she missed a lot of school. And when she was there, she seemed distant. Did she ever mention problems at home? Not directly. But once, during a discussion about civil rights, she said something that stuck with me. She said, "Sometimes the people who hurt you the most are the ones everyone else thinks are good." The school counselor, Ms. Rivera, had documented 3 meetings with Aria over the past 2 years. In her notes, she described bruises on Aria's arms and neck. When asked, Aria attributed them to clumsiness or sports injuries. Ms. Rivera had filed reports with Child Protective Services twice. Both times, the case was closed after a brief investigation found no evidence of abuse. Marcus Thornton, it seemed, had been convincing. Detective Simmons pulled the CPS files. The investigator who'd visited the home noted that Marcus was cooperative, articulate, and visibly concerned for his daughter's well-being. He explained that Aria was going through a difficult phase, struggling with her mother's absence. He'd even shown the investigator a calendar of scheduled therapy sessions. There was no record of Aria ever attending those sessions. The mother, Jessica Thornton, had left when Aria was 11. The divorce records indicated no custody dispute. Jessica had simply signed away her parental rights and moved to another state. Phone records showed no contact between mother and daughter in over 5 years. Detectives tracked Jessica down to a small apartment in Ohio. When reached by phone, her voice was flat. "I had to leave," she said. "I couldn't take him anymore." "Did he hurt you?" A long pause. "He hurt everyone." "Why didn't you take Aria with you?" "He said he'd find me. He said he'd make sure I never saw her again." "I was a coward." "I know that." "Did you know what he was doing to her?" Silence. "I suspected," Jessica finally said. "But I couldn't go back. I just couldn't." The investigation expanded. Detectives interviewed members of Marcus's church, colleagues from his job at an accounting firm, friends from his weekly poker game. The consensus was unanimous. Marcus Thornton was a model citizen. Charitable. Reliable. A single father doing his best. but there were cracks. One coworker mentioned that Marcus had a temper when things didn't go his way. Nothing violent, the man clarified. Just intense. He expected perfection. A woman from the church recalled seeing Marcus grip Aria's arm tightly during a service. It left a mark, she said. I asked if everything was okay, and he smiled and said teenagers can be dramatic. No one had pushed further. The text messages on Aria's phone told another story. Conversations with friends that abruptly ended when she stopped responding. A few attempts to reach out to helplines, searches for how to report abuse anonymously, and can a minor leave home legally. One message, sent to a friend 3 months before the shooting, read, "If something happens to me, it's because I couldn't leave." The friend never replied. Detective Simmons reviewed the evidence with her partner, Detective Chun. They sat in the precinct conference room, files spread across the table, photographs pinned to a corkboard. Self-defense? Chun asked. Possibly. But the DA's going to argue premeditation. She knew where the gun was. She knew how to use it. And there's no physical evidence he attacked her that night. So what do we call it? Simmons stared at the photograph of Aria, taken during her booking. The girl's face showed no emotion. Just exhaustion. We call it complicated, Simmons said. The question was no longer what she had done, but why she believed she had no choice to understand the moment Aria Thornton pulled the trigger. You have to go back. Not to that November evening. Not even to the years of documented abuse. You have to go back to the beginning, to the architecture of a family that, from the outside, looked whole. Marcus Thornton grew up in a strict household. His father was a military man who believed discipline was love. Expectations were clear. Failure was unacceptable. Marcus learned early to present one face to the world and keep another hidden. He met Jessica at a church social when he was 26. She was quiet, accommodating. They married quickly. Aria was born 2 years later. For a while, things seemed stable. But control, once learned, becomes a language. Marcus applied it to his marriage the way his father had applied it to him. He monitored Jessica's schedule, criticized her cooking, her housekeeping, her parenting. When she objected, he reminded her that he was the provider, the head of the household. God's order, he called it. Jessica endured it until Aria turned 11. Then, one morning, she was gone. Aria woke to find her mother's closet empty. No note. No goodbye. Just absence. Marcus told his daughter that Jessica had abandoned them both. That she'd been selfish, weak. That Aria was all he had left, and he would make sure she didn't turn out the same way. The isolation began gradually. Aria's friends stopped being invited over. Extracurricular activities were deemed unnecessary. Social media was forbidden. Marcus installed monitoring software on her phone and computer. He said it was for her protection. At school, Aria became a ghost. She completed her assignments, sat in the back of classrooms, ate lunch alone. Teachers noticed, but didn't intervene. She maintained a B average. She didn't cause trouble. In a system stretched thin, she wasn't a priority. At home, the rules multiplied. Curfew was 6 p.m. Dinner had to be prepared by 6:30. Homework completed by 8. Lights out by 9. Any deviation resulted in punishment. Sometimes it was verbal, hours of lectures about respect and gratitude. Sometimes it was physical, a slap, a shove, the belt. Marcus justified it as discipline. I'm preparing you for the real world, he'd say. The world doesn't tolerate weakness. Aria learned to be small, to anticipate his moods, to move quietly through the house like a shadow. She learned that tears made it worse, that arguing was futile, that survival meant compliance. But compliance has limits. Dr. Helen Cartwright, a forensic psychologist brought in to evaluate Aria, would later describe the phenomenon in clinical terms. Children who experience chronic abuse often develop what we call learned helplessness, she explained. They internalize the belief that they have no control over their circumstances. Escape seems impossible, so they endure. But Aria didn't just endure, the interviewer noted. She acted. Yes, Dr. Cartwright said. And that's where it gets complicated. In adolescence, the brain is still developing. The prefrontal cortex, the part responsible for impulse control and long-term planning, isn't fully formed. When a teenager in an abusive environment reaches a breaking point, their response can be extreme. They're not thinking about consequences. They're thinking about survival. The journals provided a window into Aria's deteriorating mental state. January 10th. I don't feel like a person anymore. I feel like something he owns. April 2nd. I looked up emancipation laws. You have to be able to support yourself. I don't even have a bank account. June 14th, I thought about telling someone. But who? Everyone thinks he's perfect. August 29th, I'm so tired. All the time. Like I'm carrying something too heavy and I can't put it down. October 20th, sometimes I think about what it would be like if he was just gone. Neighbors reported hearing shouting from the Thornton house with increasing frequency in the months leading up to the shooting. One woman called the police once, concerned about a loud argument. Officers arrived, spoke with Marcus, and left after determining it was a domestic matter with no immediate danger. Aria's last entry, written the day before she killed her father, was brief. November 21st, I can't do this anymore. The night of the shooting, according to Aria's statement, began like any other. She came home from school, made dinner, cleaned the kitchen, sat down to do homework. Marcus came home at 8:30. He was in a bad mood. A deal at work had fallen through. He criticized the dinner, said the chicken was dry, asked why she couldn't do anything right. Aria apologized, offered to make something else. He told her to stop being pathetic. She went upstairs. An hour later, he called her down, said they needed to talk. She sat on the sofa. He stood by the window, arms crossed. You're 16, he said. In 2 years, you'll be an adult. But you're not ready. You're weak. Ungrateful. I've sacrificed everything for you, and this is what I get. Aria didn't respond. Answer me when I'm talking to you. I'm sorry. Sorry isn't enough. You think you can just leave when you turn 18? Go off and do whatever you want. I'll tell you right now, you're not going anywhere. You'll stay here until you learn what it means to be responsible. Until you understand what I've given up for you. I didn't ask you to. He moved toward her. Fast. She flinched. Don't, he said. Don't you dare talk back to me. He grabbed her arm, pulled her to her feet. His grip was tight enough to bruise. If you ever try to leave, he said, his face inches from hers, I'll make sure no one ever finds you. Do you understand? She nodded. He let go, told her to go to bed. She didn't. She went downstairs to the basement, opened the gun safe, took the 9mm, loaded it the way he'd taught her during their one trip to the shooting range. She walked back upstairs. He was sitting on the sofa, watching television. She raised the gun. He looked at her, didn't move. Maybe he didn't believe she'd do it. Maybe he thought he still had control. She fired once. When she pulled the trigger, it wasn't only a gun that fired. It was a lifetime of silence breaking all at once. The courtroom smelled of wood polish and old air. Aria Thornton sat at the defense table in a pale blue blouse, hair pulled back, hands folded in her lap. She looked younger than 16. The fluorescent lights made her skin appear almost translucent. The trial began on a cold Monday in March, 5 months after the shooting. The prosecution, led by District Attorney Michael Brennan, presented their case with precision. This was not self-defense, he argued. This was premeditated murder. Aria had retrieved the weapon from another room. She had loaded it. She had walked upstairs and fired without immediate provocation. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, Brennan said in his opening statement, we are not here to debate whether Marcus Thornton was a perfect father. We are here to determine whether his daughter committed murder. And the evidence will show, unequivocally, that she did. The defense attorney, Sarah Kemp, a public defender with 15 years of experience, offered a different narrative. Aria, she argued, was a victim who had exhausted every other option. She had tried to tell adults. She had tried to endure. And on that November night, she genuinely believed her life was in danger. This is a case about survival, Kemp said. About what happens when a child, trapped in a cycle of violence, sees no way out. Aria Thornton did not want to kill her father. She wanted to live. The prosecution called their witnesses first. The medical examiner testified about the cause of death. A single gunshot to the chest. Fatal within minutes. No signs of a struggle. The forensic expert confirmed the timeline and the evidence. Aria's fingerprints. Gunshot residue. The weapon's ownership. Neighbors testified about Marcus Thornton's character. Polite. Involved in the community. A devoted single father. The prosecution rested on the physical facts. Aria had killed her father. The question of why, they argued, was irrelevant to the charge. The defense countered with context. Dr. Helen Cartwright took the stand. She explained the psychological profile of an abuse victim. Learned helplessness. Chronic fear. The adolescent brain under extreme stress. Aria was not acting out of anger, Dr. Cartwright testified. She was acting out of a genuine belief that she had no other choice. In her mind, it was kill or be killed. But there was no immediate threat that night. Brennan interjected during cross-examination. Marcus Thornton was sitting on the sofa. He was unarmed. In cases of prolonged abuse, Dr. Cartwright explained, the threat doesn't have to be immediate to feel real. Years of conditioning create a constant state of fear. When he threatened her earlier that evening, she believed him. She believed he would make good on that threat. The school counselor testified about the reports she'd filed. The bruises. The missed school days. The failed intervention by Child Protective Services. Aria's friend, the one who'd received the text message months earlier, took the stand. She read the message aloud. If something happens to me, it's because I couldn't leave. Her voice broke. The courtroom was silent. Jessica Thornton appeared via video link. She sat in a dim room, face gaunt, eyes hollow. She confirmed Marcus's history of control and violence. She admitted she'd left her daughter behind. Do you regret that? Kemp asked. Every day, Jessica whispered. The prosecution objected to much of the testimony, arguing it was prejudicial. The judge allowed it, stating that the defendant's state of mind was relevant to the case. On the fourth day of the trial, Aria took the stand. She spoke quietly. Her hands gripped the edges of the witness box. She described the years of abuse in measured sentences. No dramatics. No tears. Just facts. Why didn't you tell anyone? Brennan asked during cross-examination. I did, Aria said. No one listened. Why didn't you run away? Where would I go? Why didn't you wait 2 more years? You'd be an adult. You could leave legally. He said I'd never leave. I believed him. So you shot him? Yes. And you knew that would kill him? Yes. No further questions. The jury deliberated for 2 days. When they returned, the verdict was read. Guilty of second-degree murder. The judge, William Harrington, was in his late 60s. He'd spent 30 years on the bench. He'd seen hundreds of cases. But this one, he later admitted, was among the hardest. At the sentencing hearing, both sides presented their arguments. The prosecution asked for life without parole. This was a calculated act, Brennan said. Regardless of the circumstances, we cannot allow children to believe murder is a solution. The defense pleaded for leniency. Kemp cited Aria's age, her history of trauma, her lack of prior offenses. She deserves a chance at rehabilitation, she said. She deserves a future. Dr. Cartwright submitted a written statement. Sentencing this child to life in prison, she wrote, is a failure of the very system meant to protect her. Judge Harrington listened. He reviewed the case files. He considered the law. When he spoke, his voice was measured but firm. Aria Thornton, you have been found guilty of taking another person's life. The court recognizes the mitigating factors, your age, your history of abuse, your lack of criminal record. However, the law is clear. The taking of a life, outside of legally justified self-defense, demands accountability. He paused. You will be sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 25 years. A gasp rippled through the courtroom. You'll die in prison, someone murmured from the gallery. Aria's face didn't change. She simply nodded. Outside, protesters gathered. Some held signs reading, Justice for Aria. Others read, Murder is murder. Advocacy groups called the sentence excessive. Legal experts debated the line between victimhood and culpability. The case became a flashpoint in national conversations about juvenile sentencing, domestic violence, and systemic failure. In that moment, justice felt less like balance and more like repetition. Aria Thornton is 21 now. She resides in a state correctional facility 300 miles from where she grew up. She attends educational programs. She works in the prison library. She will be eligible for parole when she is 41 years old. Her mother writes occasionally. The letters go unanswered. In the years since the trial, the case has become a touchstone for reform advocates. Organizations focused on juvenile justice cited as evidence that the system fails to distinguish between children who commit crimes out of malice and those who act out of desperation. We send traumatized children to prison, one advocate said, and call it justice. But what we're really doing is punishing them for surviving. Others argue the sentence was necessary. Abuse does not excuse murder. A prosecutor wrote in an op-ed, we cannot create a legal precedent that allows victims to become killers without consequence. The debate continues. Legislative efforts to reform juvenile sentencing laws have gained traction in some states. Others remain unchanged. The question of how to balance accountability with compassion, culpability with context, remains unresolved. Marcus Thornton's church held a memorial service. Colleagues from his firm established a scholarship in his name. In the public record, he remains a man who died tragically at the hands of his daughter. The private record tells a different story. Detective Simmons, now retired, still thinks about the case. "I've worked homicides for 20 years," she said in a recent interview. "But this one stayed with me. Because it wasn't about good versus evil. It was about two people trapped in something neither of them knew how to escape." Dr. Cartwright continues to study the intersection of trauma and adolescent development. "Cases like Arias," she said, "force us to confront uncomfortable truths about how we define victimhood, about how we respond to children in crisis, about what justice actually means." The house in Willow Creek Estates sold 2 years after the shooting. A new family lives there now. They repainted the walls, replaced the carpet. The neighborhood has moved on. But some questions don't fade with time. What drives a child to kill their own parent? What responsibility does a society bear when it fails to protect the vulnerable? What does it mean to seek justice when both the accused and the victim are casualties of the same system? Aria Thornton will grow old behind bars. A child condemned to die in the same system that failed to protect her. The headlines have faded now, but the questions remain. What does justice mean when innocence and guilt share the same face? Perhaps the only thing more complicated than guilt is survival. And perhaps the real tragedy is not that a child pulled a trigger, but that she believed she had to.